My name is Elijah Mercer. I used to work as a geologist for the Bureau of Land Management, doing soil surveys and subsurface mapping across the western United States. Most of the job was quiet, uneventful. Hours of data collection under the sun, cataloging strata, identifying fault lines. I liked it that way. No surprises. Just me, the rock, and time. But in October of 2004, I was sent to southeastern Utah, near the Arizona border, an expanse of red desert where the land folds in on itself like a crumpled sheet of parchment. I'd be alone for the better part of 5 days. I brought enough fuel, water, and gear to last a week. I reached the area just before dusk. The land there is different. It's not just the color of the soil or the warped sandstone, it feels older. You can tell when a place has been touched too often by human hands. The devil's throat had not. It lay untouched, forgotten, like the earth itself had wanted to hide it. I parked my truck on a flat rise overlooking the canyons and made camp. That first night I sat beside a small fire and stared into the emptiness. The wind moved strangely there. It wasn't constant. It came in pulses, like slow breathing. And there was a smell, not strong, just something faint, sour, and metallic, like blood left too long in the sun. I slept uneasily, wrapped in my sleeping bag in the bed of the truck. Sometime after midnight, I woke to a sound I couldn't place, something between a whistle and a low moan, like air moving through a narrow fissure. It came from the canyon below. I told myself it was the wind. It always starts that way. The next morning I descended into the canyon. My instruments showed a significant fault line running beneath the ridge. But what drew my attention wasn't the data, it was the ground itself. About 3 miles in, I found the throat. That's what it looked like, a sinkhole nearly 60 feet wide, ringed by sheer red stone. It wasn't on any topographical map I had, and my GPS was acting up, giving inconsistent readings, jumping coordinates like it couldn't lock on. I leaned over the edge. It dropped straight down into darkness. Not a hint of the bottom. I dropped a stone and counted the seconds. 6, 7, 8. Nothing. No impact. That kind of depth wasn't normal for a collapse like this. It was too smooth, too precise. I took some photos, set up my instruments, began mapping the surrounding faults. I was so focused on the data, I didn't realize it at first. There were handprints on the stone, faint, weathered, but unmistakable. All along the inner lip of the sinkhole, dozens of them, not climbing out, pressed inward, like people had been dragged toward the pit, scrabbling at the rock in desperation. I didn't go back to camp right away. I lingered too long. The sun dipped low, shadows stretched across the canyon like claws, and the wind picked up again, hot, rhythmic, unnatural. I heard the moaning again, louder now, and something else, whispering. Not words, not language, just breath and tone. A suggestion of meaning just beyond understanding. I fled. That night I didn't sleep. Around 2 a.m. I heard movement near the truck. Soft footsteps on sand and stone, stopping just outside my vehicle. I stayed still, not daring to lift my head, my breath shallow. I heard breathing right beside the window. Not human, too wet. too close. I stayed that way for nearly an hour. When the sun finally broke the horizon, I emerged to find prints in the dust around the truck. Bare feet, but wrong. Too long, too narrow, toes curled like talons. I packed my gear. I told myself I'd finish the survey and leave by the end of the day. I should have left then. Mid-afternoon, I returned to the throat. It had changed. The rim was different, wider, as if the earth itself had shifted. My previous markers were gone, just gone, and near the edge, I saw something that made me freeze. A rope. Not recent. Old, frayed, half-rotted. Tied to a stake driven into the stone. It disappeared into the throat. I hadn't noticed it yesterday. I approached cautiously, squatted to inspect the stake. There were deep gouges in the rock, scratches, like someone had tried to climb out someone who hadn't made it. And then the smell hit me. Rot. Ancient, sun-baked decomposition. Like something deep inside had turned, spoiled, and was leaking out. And then the whispering came again. But this time it was behind me. I spun. Nothing. Just red stone, heat shimmer, and silence. I turned back. The rope was gone. Gone. My skin went cold. Not from the wind, but from something else. A presence. Like I was no longer alone. I ran ... I didn't stop until I was back at the truck. I climbed in, locked the doors, and drove. Fast. No GPS. No maps. Just instinct. About 10 miles out, the road changed. Not physically. Visually. It shifted. The dust kicked up by my tires seemed to hang in the air too long. The trees, sparse as they were, looked twisted. Not just bent by weather, twisted from the root. Wrong. I drove until I hit pavement again. Didn't stop until I reached a ranger station just outside of Monticello. The ranger, a woman in her 60s with a lined face and sharp eyes, listened to my story in silence. When I finished, she nodded slowly and walked to a back room. She returned with a thick folder. Inside were old reports, missing persons, surveyors, campers, even a park ranger from 1973. All from the same area. All vanished. Some of the reports mentioned the same thing. Whispers, handprints, an unmarked pit that locals avoided. The Navajo call it something, she told me. Ikastai, the place that devours. She told me not to go back. I didn't argue. It's been nearly 20 years I changed careers. I live in upstate New York now. Nowhere near canyons or deserts. I don't go camping. I don't hike. I don't even drive long distances alone. But I still dream of it. Of the throat. Sometimes I hear the whispers. Faint, just under the edge of consciousness. Like something calling out, not in malice, but in need. Like it's still waiting. Like it's not finished with me. And the worst part? Sometimes I wake up and my feet are dirty, and there's red dust on my sheets. My name's Clay Harper. I'm a wildlife photographer by trade, or I was, before what happened last October. I haven't picked up a camera since. I haven't even left the house. Not really. These days, the closest I get to nature is the tree outside my window. I've tried to move on. Therapy. Support groups. But nothing really works, because deep down, I know the truth. Something followed me back. It started like most of my trips. A solo trek deep into a mountain range, chasing the promise of something rare and elusive species, a perfect landscape, anything worth capturing. That fall, I'd set my sights on Ridgecrest Pass, tucked deep in the Bitterroot Mountains of western Montana. It was remote, barely documented. I'd found it referenced in an old UC Geological Survey file from the 60s mentioned once, then never again. That should have been my first clue. I arrived at the trailhead the afternoon of October 7th. No cell service, no signs, no other vehicles. Just the winding logging road behind me and the jagged spines of the Bitterroots ahead. The air was thinner up there, clean, cold, smelled like pine and snowmelt. I loaded my gear into a hiking pack, camera, tent, bear spray, food for a week, and started the climb. I'd planned to hike for 2 days, set up camp just below the pass, and spend the rest of the week photographing the high alpine terrain. There were rumors of rare mountain goats, even lynx, but I wasn't chasing animals this time. I was chasing silence. By the second day I got it. There was no sound, not even wind, no birds, no insects, just the crunch of my boots on frostbitten ground and the occasional crack of ice shearing off a distant rock face. It didn't feel peaceful. It felt hollow, like something was missing. The air grew colder as I ascended, and the terrain more treacherous, sharp stone ridges, ice-glazed switchbacks, vertical drops that plunged into black pine valleys. Just past dusk, I found a narrow plateau just below Ridgecrest Pass. Sheltered by a cliff wall and surrounded by massive stone outcroppings that looked almost placed, I set up camp. That night I lit a small fire, ate freeze-dried stew, and stared up at the sky. No stars, just thick cloud cover pressing low over the mountain. It felt like being buried. Around midnight, I woke to a sound I couldn't explain. It was distant, low, and guttural. Not an animal, not a landslide. It sounded wet, like a boulder being dragged across mud, slow and deliberate. I lay there in my sleeping bag, listening. It came again, closer. Then the silence returned. At first light, I checked the perimeter. No prints, no signs of movement. Just frost and scattered pine needles. I told myself it was the wind, a trick of acoustics in the mountains. But that morning, I found something else. About 50 yards upslope, embedded in the rock, was a mark. At first, I thought it was a natural groove, some fault line or glacial scar. But it was too uniform, too deliberate. A perfect circle, maybe 2 feet wide, etched deep into the stone. Around it were jagged lines like sun rays or maybe claws. I took a photo, cataloged the coordinates, and moved on. That was my job, after all. But as the day went on, I kept finding more of them. Circles, symbols, some shallow, some deep, all spaced irregularly, as if scattered by a hand too large to comprehend. I stopped taking pictures. That night I didn't sleep. The sound came again closer than before, accompanied by something else, a kind of rhythmic clicking, like bones snapping or teeth chattering. I sat up in the tent, bear spray in one hand, flashlight in the other. I scanned the slope beyond the clearing. My beam caught nothing. Then I noticed the smell. Rot. earthy, wet rot like a compost heap soaked in blood. The sound stopped, and something tapped the side of my tent. Once, twice, 3 times I froze. Another tap, and a low scraping sound circling the fabric wall around me. I killed the flashlight, sat there in the dark, barely breathing. Eventually the sounds faded. The smell lingered. When I stepped out at dawn, there were no tracks, just a faint impression of a circle in the frost, maybe 4 feet wide, where nothing had frozen. I decided to leave. I packed fast, heart hammering in my chest. As I slung my pack over my shoulder, I glanced up at Ridgecrest Pass, maybe 200 feet above me, and I saw something standing there. Tall, slender, pale. Not a bear. Not human. It had no face, just skin pulled taut over a narrow skull, stretched like parchment. It didn't move, didn't even flinch, just watched. I turned and fled down the trail. I hiked until dusk, only stopping to drink and check my bearings. But something was wrong with the landscape. The trail had changed. The rock formations were unfamiliar. Trees that should have been on my left were now on my right. The air was warmer, even though I was descending. And worse, the silence had followed me. It wasn't just the absence of noise. It was a kind of pressure, like a thick fog pressing in on my ears. I felt disoriented, lightheaded. That night I didn't camp. I kept walking with my headlamp on, moving downhill until the batteries gave out. I finally rested beneath an overhang, wrapped in my bag. I don't remember falling asleep, but I remember the dream. I was back at the stone circle, the one I found etched in the mountain, but now it was open like a hatch, and something was rising out of it. Too many limbs, joints that bent wrong, skin like dry wax stretched over bone. It had my voice. It whispered things I didn't understand. Then it turned toward me and opened its mouth, and I woke up, but I wasn't under the overhang. I was back at the campsite, right below Ridgecrest Pass. My pack was there. My tent still half collapsed. Everything exactly as I'd left it, except there were more circles now, dozens of them, etched around my gear in a perfect spiral. I didn't walk out, I ran. I ran until my legs gave out, then crawled, then staggered again. I followed the sun, followed the slope of the land. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I just moved. It took me 2 days to reach the service road. Another 4 hours until I flagged down a logging truck and begged the driver to take me to the nearest town. I told no one. Not at first, how could I? I checked satellite maps. Ridgecrest Pass didn't exist anymore. Just a blank spot on the survey data. I tried returning the next spring, but the road was washed out, gone, like it had never been there, but the dreams haven't stopped. And sometimes when I wake up I find frost in my room, a perfect circle etched into the window pane, like it's marking me, like it's waiting, and I know one day I'll go back, or something beneath that mountain will come looking for me. I wasn't the kind of person who believed in omens, but if I had been, I'd have turned back the moment my hiking boots lost grip on the loose scree, and I nearly tumbled backward off the mountain. I should have taken the slipping rocks and the silence in the trees as warnings. I should have listened, but I didn't. My name is Eric Marlowe, 34, solo backpacker, and until recently a firm believer in rational explanations. No cryptids, no spirits, no ancient curses. Just people, wildlife, and nature's occasional cruelty. At least that's what I thought before I tried to climb Mount Antero alone in early September. I'd taken a week off work after a brutal stretch at the Emergency Dispatch Center in Colorado Springs. Burnout was creeping in. My boss called it compassion fatigue, and he wasn't wrong. I needed solitude, distance from the panicked voices on the other end of the line. So I packed my gear, filled my pack, and headed for the mountains. Antero isn't the most dramatic peak in the Solwatch Range, but it has this rugged beauty, a jagged spine of stone that cuts through the sky, with veins of aquamarine and feldspar gleaming in the sun. I'd read that people had found gems up there. I wasn't interested in treasure, just silence. And at first, that's what I got. The trail was steep and mostly deserted. Early fall meant that tourists were thinning out, and the weather hadn't turned brutal yet. The air was crisp, thin, and clean. I set up camp just below treeline, a flat spot nestled between two twisted bristlecone pines. It was quiet in that eerie mountain way where the wind sounds more like breathing, and every snap of a twig turns your head. That first night I heard what I assumed were marmots scurrying around my tent. Once or twice something brushed against the nylon. Probably a pine branch, I told myself. When I stepped out to relieve myself around midnight, I could have sworn I saw movement higher up the slope, something tall and thin passing between boulders. But my flashlight revealed nothing but rocks and shadows. Still, I didn't sleep much after that. By morning, the unease had faded. I chalked it up to altitude and being alone. I'd planned to summit that day and return to camp by evening. My pack was light, just water, snacks, and essentials. The trail became less defined as I climbed, shifting to loose rock and scree. That's when I slipped. One moment I was upright, the next I was sliding down the slope, boots scraping and arms flailing. I caught myself on a jagged boulder, heart racing. When I looked up, I saw something. Something. Not a person, not an animal, just a figure, high on the ridge, hunched but tall. It wasn't wearing anything. Its skin, or whatever covered it, looked grayish and weathered, like old bark. I stared at it, waiting for movement, a sign I wasn't hallucinating. But it didn't move. Then the wind shifted, and I heard something, not a voice. Not exactly. More like a dry, brittle sound carried on the breeze. It was barely louder than a whisper, but it filled my head like it was being spoken directly inside it. Come down. I turned, nearly fell again, and scrambled the rest of the way back to the trail. I didn't look back. I just kept descending until I reached the tree line again. But something had changed. The forest felt tighter, the trees more gnarled, leaning inward. The birds had gone silent. I told myself I was just shaken. Took a long drink from my water bottle. Maybe I was dehydrated or experiencing some kind of altitude-induced paranoia. By late afternoon, I was back at my campsite, trying to calm my nerves, but the silence never lifted. That night, the whispering returned. Only now it wasn't carried on the wind. It was around my tent, right outside. soft, brittle voices. Not speaking a language I recognized more, like dry leaves brushing together, layered over each other like dozens of mouths whispering at once. I held my breath, clutching the knife I kept in my sleeping bag. The whispers grew louder, closer, then everything stopped. Something pressed against the side of the tent, slowly, deliberately, like a hand or something like it. I didn't scream. I didn't move. I don't know how. I just lay there, heart thundering, knife shaking in my grip, staring at the fabric between me and whatever was outside. After what felt like hours, the pressure lifted. I stayed awake until dawn. At first light, I broke camp and began hiking out. I didn't care that it was early, that I was tired. I needed to get off that mountain, but the trail was wrong. Somehow it had changed. The markers were missing. Trees looked unfamiliar. Distances seemed off. I walked for hours, and every turn brought me back to the same place, that damn clearing between the bristlecone pines. By the third time, I realized I wasn't just lost. I was being kept here. That night, I didn't set up camp. I just sat on a rock, knife in hand, flashlight dead, listening. And they came. I couldn't see them, not clearly. Just glimpses, pale limbs in the shadows, hunched forms gliding just out of reach. I couldn't tell how many there were. Maybe they weren't separate. Maybe it was one thing, or maybe it didn't matter. The whispering began again, louder this time, insistent. Stay. It felt like it was inside my skull, under my skin, in my lungs. I don't remember falling asleep, but I remember waking up at home, in my bed. No explanation. No missing time. My gear was in my garage, covered in pine needles and dirt. My boots still caked with scree. My GPS, when I finally plugged it in, showed only one track, a clean path to Mount Antero, and back. But I don't remember coming down. I've tried to forget. I've tried to explain it away: stress, hallucination, altitude sickness. But then the dreams started. I wake up to the sound of whispering, sometimes faint, sometimes right in my ear. My hands still ache from gripping the knife. I hear the wind rattling the windows, and for a split second it sounds like a dry voice saying, "Come back." And I know it's still waiting. It was October 2004 when I took a solo trip out to Red Hollow, a stretch of dense forest in northern Pennsylvania that locals didn't talk much about. I wasn't looking for anything supernatural, hell. I wasn't even looking for adventure. I just needed to get away from the mess that had become my life. My name's Evan, and back then I was 33, recently divorced, laid off, and pretty much living out of my Subaru Outback. I'd spent the last few months drifting from town to town with a notebook full of unfinished ideas and a head full of regret. Red Hollow wasn't on any official hiking map. I only found it thanks to a half-legible note scribbled in the margin of an old trail guide I bought at a used bookstore in Scranton. The note said, simply, "Red Hollow, don't go past the stone gate. They don't like it." I should have taken that as a warning, but instead I took it as intrigue. I pulled into a gravel turnout just before dusk, the forest already soaked in autumn shadows. The trees were tall and close, and there was a kind of heaviness to the air, as if the land had taken a deep deep breath and was holding it. I grabbed my pack and headed in, sticking close to the old trail that cut through a corridor of sugar maples and red oaks, the path carpeted and leaves the color of rust. I hiked about 3 miles in before setting up camp near a half-dry creek bed. The silence out there was different, thicker than normal. Not peaceful, just still. Even the birds kept quiet. That night I lay in my tent, listening to the wind, or what I thought was the wind, move through the trees. But the longer I listened, the more I realized it didn't sound right. It wasn't constant, like wind should be. It came in pulses, like something breathing. And somewhere behind that sound, there was something else. A faint clicking. At first, I thought it was just branches knocking together, but it was too rhythmic, too deliberate. I didn't sleep much that night. The next day, I followed the trail deeper, hoping to clear my head and get some distance from whatever weirdness I'd imagined. Around noon, I found it, the stone gate. It wasn't a gate in the traditional sense, just 2 moss-covered stone pillars rising out of the forest floor, maybe 6 feet tall, spaced about 10 feet apart. No fence, no wall. Just those 2 stones, standing alone like sentries from a forgotten time. I stood there for a long time, staring at them. I should have turned back. Instead, I stepped between them. The forest changed after that. The color seemed muted, the trees darker, more tangled. The wind didn't move the leaves the same way. It felt intentional, like the forest had become aware of me. I kept moving, ignoring the rising chill in my spine, telling myself I'd just walk a little farther and then turn around. That's when I found the house, a crumbling, weathered structure half swallowed by the woods, its roof caved in on one side and the porch warped and sinking into the earth. There was no path leading to it, no signs that anyone had lived there in decades. I approached slowly, calling out just in case. No answer. Inside the house was hollow. Dust thick in the air, old furniture barely recognizable beneath mildew and rot. But what struck me most were the photographs, dozens of them, hanging crooked on the walls. All black and white, all portraits. And in every single one, the person's face had been scratched out. Not torn or faded scratched. Deep gouges where eyes should be. I should have left right then. I didn't sleep. I sat on the floor of that strange cabin, the journal still open beside me, lit by the dying beam of my flashlight. The words I'd read looped through my head over and over, each line more disturbing than the last. I had no memory of writing them, and yet the handwriting was mine. Every stroke, every hesitation of ink, it was me. Don't listen when it talks like her. That's not her anymore. The trees keep moving when you're not looking. If you see your own face in the clearing, run. It's already too late. I stayed there, motionless, for what felt like hours. Eventually, I turned the flashlight off to preserve the battery. And that was a mistake, because when the light died, the house started breathing again. Slow, almost gentle inhalations. A wooden floorboard creaked every few seconds, in a rhythm too steady to be random. The walls seemed to expand and contract just slightly, like the place itself had lungs. And then came the whispers, faint, from upstairs. I wasn't ready for upstairs, but I couldn't stay in that room either. So I stood, clutching the flashlight like a weapon, even though it no longer worked. and crept toward the front door. The hinges moaned as I pushed it open, and I stepped back into the freezing night. The air outside was different now, wrong. The trees weren't where I remembered them. The path I had followed in was gone. In its place was dense brush, twisted roots, and a blackness that swallowed the moonlight whole. Turned in a slow circle, the forest had rearranged itself. I was trapped. Somewhere behind me, the floorboards inside the house creaked again. Not in rhythm this time. Footsteps. I bolted. I didn't care where I was going, I just ran. My boots thudded over frost-hardened dirt, snagging on roots, slipping over wet leaves. My breath came in panicked gasps. Branches whipped at my face. I didn't look back, couldn't. Eventually, I broke through the trees into another clearing. At first, I thought I'd found the same field I'd camped in before. But then I saw the fire. It was small, flickering low. A single flame in the center of the clearing. No logs, no pit, just flame, hovering inches above the grass. And beside it, sitting cross-legged in the dirt, was a woman. "Evan," she said, not looking up. Her voice was calm, familiar. I froze. No one should have known my name. Not here. The woman looked up slowly. Her face was cast in shadow, but I could see enough to know I had never seen her before. And yet, something in me twisted like I should know her, like she was buried somewhere in a memory I hadn't made yet. "Sit," she said, "before it finds you." I didn't move. "You left once," she said, "but you came back." My throat was dry. "What are you talking about?" Her lips curved into a small, sad smile. "They always come back. That's how it keeps itself fed." I took a slow step back. The woman didn't react. She stared into the hovering flame like it held the answers to every question I hadn't asked yet. "You remember more than you think," she said. "It's already started. The gaps, the time slips, the echoing thoughts. That thing in the house? That wasn't the first time you saw it." I shook my head. "You're insane." She looked up at me again, this time with pity in her eyes. "You keep saying that, every time." The fire between us flared suddenly bright white and possibly hot. I stumbled back, shielding my face, but there was no heat, only light. And in that light I saw things, figures, faces, dozens of them floating in the air above the flame. Men and women, all pale, all wide-eyed, all looking right at me. I recognized some of them. I didn't know from where. One face pressed closer to the firelight than the others. A man in his 40s, gray stubble, deep, sunken eyes. Me, older, burned and bloodied, and staring at me with rage. "You shouldn't have come back," the older me said. The flame vanished. So did the woman. I was alone. The clearing was dark and silent again. I dropped to my knees, shaking, the taste of copper in my mouth. I didn't remember falling, but my palms were scraped, and there was blood on my tongue like I'd bitten it. I wanted to scream, but I didn't want whatever was out there to hear me. I got up, slowly, quietly. I turned around and nearly collapsed again, because behind me, about 10 feet away, was a figure, standing perfectly still, almost blending into the trees. The same old man I'd seen in the woods earlier, only now he was smiling. His mouth too wide, his eyes too many. There were more of them, figures behind every tree. watching, and somewhere deep in the woods the forest exhaled. The eyes didn't blink. There were too many of them. Somewhere in the dark between the trees, a dozen or maybe more figures just stood there, silent, unmoving. They didn't breathe. They didn't shift. They just watched. The old man was front and center, that same crooked smile stretched impossibly wide, like it had been carved into his face. I backed away slowly, never taking my eyes off him. My breath came in short gasps. I didn't know how long I stood there staring at him through the black. 5 minutes? 20? Time didn't seem to matter anymore. Then, without a sound, the figures were gone, just vanished. No footsteps, no rustling leaves, no dispersing shadows. I was alone again, and somehow that was worse. I don't remember how I got back to the cabin. I must have blacked out, because one moment I was in the clearing, and the next I was standing in that god-awful living room again, the door wide open behind me. My legs ached, my skin was covered in scratches, but I didn't remember walking back. Something had changed. I could feel it in the air, thick and metallic, like blood on the tongue. There was a noise upstairs now, a slow dragging, not footsteps, something being pulled. I didn't want to go up, but I did. The stairs groaned under me, the kind of groan that makes your stomach drop. With each step, the dragging sound stopped, then resumed, a little louder. At the top of the stairs there was a hallway, 3 doors. One open, 2 shut. I walked toward the open one. Inside was a small bedroom, dusty, rotten curtains fluttering gently, even though there was no breeze. An old bed frame, a mirror on the wall, and sitting on the edge of the bed was me, or someone who looked like me, pale, hollow-eyed, clutching something in both hands. A photograph. I stepped into the room. My reflection didn't move. "What the hell is this?" I asked. My voice felt weak in the air, like it didn't belong there. The man looked up. He didn't smile, didn't speak, just held out the photograph. I took it. It was black and white, worn at the edges. A group of 4 hikers standing in front of this same cabin, younger, smiling. One of them was me. The others were faces I didn't recognize, except I did recognize them. Somewhere deep down I knew who they were. And suddenly it hit me, the journal, the entries I hadn't written, the ones that said, "Don't listen when it talks like her." That's not her anymore. I'd been here before. This wasn't my first trip into the woods, not even close. This was a return. My stomach twisted. I staggered back out of the room, down the stairs, clutching the photograph like a lifeline. The light outside the windows had changed. It was still night, but the moonlight had turned red, bathing the room in a soft, hellish glow. That's when I heard the voices again. Not whispers this time. Not murmurs, names, my name, over and over again, spoken in different voices. That's when I heard the voices again. Not whispers this time. Not murmurs, names, my name, over and over again, spoken in different voices. I opened the front door. The forest was closer than it had been before. Trees that had been 50 feet away now loomed right up against the porch. The path was gone again. Only dense, choking forest, and that sound, that pulse, like a heartbeat made of roots and stone and teeth, surrounded me. That's when I saw the bodies hung from trees, not decomposing, preserved almost, like the forest was keeping them fresh. They were the hikers from the photo. One of them, God help me, was me. It wasn't possible, but there it was, my own face, staring down at me from a noose, eyes open, mouth twisted in a silent scream, skin gray-blue. And that's when the forest spoke, not in words, in memory. It poured into my mind like water through broken glass, ripping through everything I thought was true. I remembered, not all at once, not clearly, but I remembered enough. I'd come here before, in 2011, a group of 4, me, Claire, Thomas, and Daniel, friends. We wanted an adventure, something remote, something that no one else had done. We found the cabin. We stayed too long. Something happened. Something woke up. One by one, the others disappeared. I tried to run. I made it out. But the forest, it never let go. It called me back over and over again. Every time I left, it erased more. Erased just enough for me to be curious again, to wonder, to come back. And every time it kept a piece of me, until now I dropped to my knees, screaming, crying, laughing. It was never going to let me go. The version of me in the cabin, the one who handed me the photo, was just the most recent one. There had been others, dozens, maybe. How many times had I wandered these woods, thinking it was the first time? The red moon burned overhead. The trees closed in. The voices rose to a fever pitch. And then, just as suddenly, silence. The forest went still. The cabin vanished behind me, and I was standing at the edge of the highway. Sunlight, cars, birds. I was back. I stumbled into town an hour later. Covered in dirt, wild-eyed, the locals didn't ask questions. Maybe they knew. Maybe they'd seen it before. I didn't tell anyone what happened. What would I say? That the forest eats time? That I've died already, and this is just another loop? I kept the photograph. It's in a drawer in my apartment. Sometimes late at night, I take it out and look at the faces. They haven't aged. But mine has. I don't hike anymore. And when I dream, I see the forest watching me, still waiting, still hungry, still whispering my name. They say the trail is closed now. The official reason? Erosion, washed out bridges, wildlife hazards. Something vague enough to be forgotten. There are warning signs at the old trailhead. Bright yellow boards with cracked black lettering, trail closed. Dangerous terrain, nitrogen monoxide access beyond this point. Violators will be fined or prosecuted. But no one patrols it, because no one dares to. The locals in the nearby town of Dunlow Ridge know better. The older ones, anyway. They don't talk about Red Hollow anymore. Not out loud. They just glance toward the tree line with lowered voices and wary eyes. Sometimes they whisper the old names. The Murmuring Wood, the Root Well, the Hunger Forest. But most people have forgotten. The town has changed since Evan. New families, new faces, new kids who don't know what that land used to be, until someone wanders in again. His name is Cody Lang, 26, amateur filmmaker. He's been documenting abandoned places for his YouTube channel, Urban Echo. His most popular video hit 400,000 views, an old sanatorium in New Hampshire. He's always on the hunt for the next big discovery. The kind of story no one else has captured. The kind of place people warn you not to go. So when he hears about an unmarked trail in West Virginia that doesn't appear on Google Maps, he's intrigued. When he learns about the legends, the missing hikers, the disappearances, he's hooked. The locals refuse to say much, but he gets enough to find the spot. And one gray morning in October, Cody parks his rental Jeep just off the gravel road at the edge of the forest. No cell signal, just the hum of wind through trees and the distant croak of a raven overhead. He clips a GoPro to his backpack strap, checks the battery on his camcorder, and starts walking. The camera rolls. He jokes to himself in the first take. Well, this is it, Red Hollow. Supposedly the creepiest place in Appalachia. Locals say it swallows people. I say, let's find out. He smiles at the lens. That's the last smile the footage ever captures. 3 weeks later, a hiker finds his camera wedged in the roots of a black pine. It's still recording. Or maybe it just started again. The last 30 seconds are nothing but static until the static shifts. Just faintly in the gray haze, there's a shape. A figure in the trees. Not Cody. Older. Worn. Dressed in faded clothes from another era. It's Evan. But his face is wrong. Too still. Too knowing. He raises a hand toward the camera, and his lips move. No sound, just one word, again. Then the feed cuts. No one ever finds Cody, just his backpack. And a journal. Inside the last written page simply says, "Don't listen when it talks like her. If you see your own face in the clearing, run. The forest remembers you, even if you forget it." And in the margins, scrawled in shaky, rushed pen, "The Red Hollow doesn't sleep. It waits. And it never forgets a name once it learns it." An isolated hike, a forgotten marker, and something ancient that watches from the water. My name is Garrett Moore. I'm a wildlife photographer, or at least that's the excuse I give people when I disappear into the woods for days at a time. Truth is, I just like being alone. I've always felt more at home with the sound of wind in the trees than with people making small talk in fluorescent-lit offices. That's why I found myself deep in the Washita Mountains in early October of last year, hiking into an old stretch of forest that hadn't seen foot traffic in decades. I'd read about it in an obscure forum where someone posted a blurry photo of a strange stone marker half submerged in a creek bed. No coordinates, no follow-up, just a caption. "Don't touch it. It watches." That was all it took. I packed my gear and set out 2 days later. The first day was uneventful. Golden light filtered through the oaks, and I made decent progress bushwhacking through dense undergrowth to reach the remote area where the photo had supposedly been taken. That night I camped near a small bluff. The air was crisp. The stars were sharp. But sometime around 2 a.m. I woke up. I couldn't explain why. I just remember lying there in the tent, heart racing, certain something was moving just beyond the range of my firelight. Nothing showed itself, no sounds, just silence, heavy and complete. The next morning I found the creek. It was narrow, maybe 10 feet across, and ran shallow over smooth stone. I followed it upstream until I found the marker. Just like in the photo, it was a boulder, maybe the size of a large cooler, rising out of the water at a tilt, weathered, black. and covered in markings, not carvings, not letters, but deep organic grooves, like something had dragged claws across its surface over and over for centuries. As I stepped closer, the air around me changed, grew still. The birds went silent. The wind died. I reached for my camera, raised the lens, and froze. There were footprints around the base of the stone. Bare feet, human, but they weren't mine. I hadn't walked into the creek yet. They led to the stone and then stopped. I backed away slowly. I wanted to believe they were old, maybe left by another hiker years ago, but the mud was soft. Too soft to hold a print for long. These were fresh. I didn't take the photo. I turned around and hiked back to camp. The wind picked up again once I left the creek bed. Birds chirped. It was like someone hit play on a paused forest soundtrack. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a weird atmospheric pressure thing, or my nerves, but it didn't help. That night I didn't sleep. I just lay in the tent, listening. Somewhere out there I heard water trickling, and something moving through it, slowly, deliberately. I told myself it was just a raccoon, maybe a deer. Then I heard breathing, not an animal's, a slow, wet exhale. I stayed completely still, hand on the handle of my knife. I didn't light the lantern. I didn't unzip the tent. I just waited, muscles tense, for hours. Eventually, the sounds stopped. By morning, I convinced myself it had all been a dream. I broke camp fast and made for the creek again. Something inside me needed closure. I needed to see the marker in daylight again, to photograph it and prove to myself it was just a rock. But when I reached the creek, the stone was gone. Not shifted, not submerged, gone. The water trickled quietly through an empty bed. The footprints were gone too. But something had been left behind. Gouges in the rocks along the bank. Deep claw marks. Fresh. I turned to leave, but something stopped me. A sound. Water sloshing just a few feet upstream. I looked. There was a face, half submerged, pale, eyes open, staring at me. It didn't move, didn't blink, just stared. I ran. I didn't stop for hours. I didn't eat, didn't drink. I pushed my legs until I collapsed against my car and peeled out of the trailhead parking lot, barely looking in the rearview mirror. I tried telling someone, a forest ranger, actually. Gave him a cleaned-up version, said I'd seen something strange, maybe a person out there who needed help. He smiled tightly and nodded. "You went near Old Devil's Creek, didn't you?" he asked. I hesitated, then nodded. He just sighed and said, "That place has been trouble since before we started keeping records. Don't go back." I haven't. I won't. But a week ago, someone posted a new photo to that same forum. A different boulder, different creek, same markings, same caption. "Don't touch it. It watches." And this time the photo had a shadow standing behind the stone. Something tall, something wrong.